Dogs of the Deadlands, which just released here September 13th, as you're listening to us, esteemed audience. True to my word, I will not make you sit through me summarizing your book to you and getting it wrong. So what does esteemed audience need to know about Dogs of Deadlands?
Okay, I mean, can I hold it up to the microphone here? Would that be useful? The book begins in 1986, when, as I'm sure your listeners know, there was this terrible explosion in the Chernobyl nuclear plant in what is now Ukraine, but was the Soviet Union. And so this big explosion, it contaminated the local area with radioactivity. And so the people had to be evacuated. But they weren't allowed to take their animals with them. They were told to be coming back in a few days. And so there's a kind of human main character in the story it's her 6th birthday on the day that the plant blows up. And she's been given a puppy for her birthday, a Samoyed puppy, which may have a little bit of wolf in it, but she has to leave her little dog behind her. It's a slightly heartbreaking scene when she has to let go of the dog. So that's a kind of human story, then follows Natasha through her life, and she's blighted by this experience. She's got this hole in her core, left by this absence of this beautiful puppy. But the main narrative follows 2 generations of dogs who are interacting with the local wildlife. So when the people moved out of that area, the whole area was rewilded. So the people moved out, and the big fauna came back in. So bison, moose, wolves, most famously, lynx and bear all came back into these now abandoned forests. And my story is about how these feral dogs interact with the wolves. And it's sort of 2 generations of the dogs. You do find out in the end that one generation, the older, the mother is the puppy Zoya that Natasha left behind. Although the main narrative is about her offspring. She's got two dogs, 2 puppies called Misha and Bratan. And it's about their struggles to survive in this incredible wilderness. And the kind of core of it is about how they try and survive against the dogs are kind of the good guys in the book, and the bad guys to begin with are the wolves. So I did lots of research about, both about how feral dogs survive in the wild, but also about wolf and dog interaction, also lots of research about the wolves themselves, trying to get it all right. And so from the point of view of the dogs, the wolves are the bad guys. And a lot of the research I went into was fairly grim. So I didn't quite realize this. But you know that wolves and dogs are basically the same species. Genetically, they're pretty much identical. They can fully interbreed, have fertile offspring. But wolves have got dogs rather have lost a lot of those adaptations that wolves have had. So they're weaker, their bite strength isn't anywhere like a wolf. And also in wolf packs, the males play a full role in looking after the puppies, whereas dogs, even wild dogs, the males don't play any kind of role. So there's all these adaptations for the wild that the dogs have lost. And generally speaking, when a dog and a wolf meet in the wild, it's only got one outcome, which is that within seconds, often within 5 seconds, the wolf has killed the dog, and then they eat him. And the only way in which this doesn't end up badly for the dog is if it's I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. If it's a lady dog and it's a daddy wolf, and they become romantically attached, that's the one time the wolf will not kill the dog. So that's sort of the kind of background to it. So the 2nd generation of dogs that we follow in the story are half wolf, and it's about their struggles to survive. You did a better job of trying to explain what my book was about, but that's basically it in a big cloud. And then so the 2 storylines finally come back together again when Natasha is reunited with one of the dogs, without giving too much away. Did that make sense?
It's an expansive story, so I'm impressed by the attempt to.
It was terrible. So I sometimes do, big influence in this book was The Call of the Wild by Jack London. Brilliant book, again, about dogs and wolves interacting. And I sometimes say this is like Call of the Wild meets War and Peace by Tolstoy, just given that I've got this huge cast of characters and this Russian background there.
So it's you mentioned you're a teenager in the 80s. I'm assuming the explosion of Chernobyl catches your imagination just like the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, it happened when I was actually at university. So I was 21 at the time, and I had one of my friends was studying Russian in Kiev, which was the nearest big town to Chernobyl. And so she had to be evacuated. So it was a kind of, it had a big impact on me then. It was that kind of big event. Also, it came at a time when still the Cold War was in full spate, and so that nuclear terror that maybe has been, that specter's rising again because of the awful situation in Ukraine now. But that was all the background to that, and then this nuclear disaster. So yeah, it was a really, in many ways, a hot topic back then.
And so has this been sort of in the back of your mind that sooner or later I'm going to write about the disaster? Or
no, it wasn't in that way. But once the disaster happened, then you got all this really intriguing stuff to do with the ecology of the place. And because I've always going back to my early interest in the natural world, so that was always my kind of main focus. I saw a couple of brilliant National Geographic documentaries about this rewilding of the area and about the reappearance of the wolves, and so that was, I don't know, that's what really triggered me. There was one amazing scene I saw where there was this wolf pack in the foreground. In the background, you had the ruined nuclear plant. It just seemed to be a really striking image. And I thought, there's a story in this. Then there was a different National Geographic story about the surviving dogs. So the pets that were abandoned, most of them just died. But the very few that survived by hanging around the nuclear plant where there was still workmen there. And so it's a program about those surviving dogs as well. And I brought the two things together.
Gotcha. So you see that image and that's in your head for years, months?
Years, yeah. A long gestation period.
Always fascinated by how long an author's gestation period takes, how that kernel eventually becomes the full tree.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but part of the thing about being a children's writer is that you have an obligation, I think, to keep on churning out the books. Because if you're writing for, say, 13-year-olds and you take 5 years over a book, then your 13-year-olds are 18, they're too old to read your book. So I do feel this pressure to produce. And so I've often got, 2 or 3 books on the go at the same time. There'll be the one that I'm actually writing. Then in the back of my mind, there'll be the one that is gestating, to use that word again. And so this one was gestating for a long time. Probably I wrote 10 books while I was still thinking, sometimes subconsciously, about Dogs of the Deadlands.
Gotcha. And then you have said that this book, Dogs of the Deadlands, has been your biggest ever writing challenge. I'm assuming until the next one, but as of your writing,
I will never write a book like this again. It's been too much of a challenge. It's broken me.
Well, how did it break you? What was so challenging?
Well, okay, partly, my muddled explanation of the story earlier on might give an indication. There's a lot happening in this story. The two different storylines of the dogs and the human, just that was quite hard to encompass. But just purely the timeline was fantastically complicated. Trying to get a human growing from childhood to adulthood, and the two generations of the dogs, it was just viciously complicated. And I know there are there's different types of writers. There are the planners, and then there are the pantsers. Is the term that I've heard people just do it on the seat of their pants, by the seat of their pants. But I always, historically, I've had an idea for a story and I've just started writing it, and I don't do any planning at all. I know roughly the shape of it, but I just start typing, and basically I write the first draft. That's kind of what gets published. But with this, I had to really plot it out in intense detail. So with the post-it notes all over the wall and different apps I tried to help me plan it, and it was still really hard to make those two timelines work. I had to do a little bit of stretching and compressing. So it was a kind of intellectual challenge that was different to my normal writing challenge, which is just to find the best words for my ideas. Here it was logistical almost, and it was just really, really hard. And so this book went through as well many more drafts than most of my books. I mean, usually when I finish my first draft, what's published is 99% the same, with a few corrections. Whereas the first draft was probably only 50% there. It was just a terrible, terrible mess. And also there were even more digressions, huge great bubbles that came off from the main storyline, which I don't know if you find that, and to me, your writer listeners, but often the digressive bits were some of the best writing. But because they didn't work to move the plot forward, they had to be cut away, which is always brutal and hurts, killing your darlings.
Do you save your darlings for use elsewhere, or at least promise yourself maybe they'll be used?
Yes. Well, I mean, the two big bits that had to go were it's a whole self-contained bit set in the Second World War about the partisans and the Germans fighting in around the same area, which also involved wolves, and another part set during the Afghan war. So that they are, I'm going to try and do something with them, or is that too cynical? But I hate wasting words. Do you hate the whole idea of spending an hour of your life writing a perfect sentence and then for it to never be used is heartbreaking?
My longest novel never got published, but it did get farmed out and became 3 other novels. So that's fine.
Okay.
Parts of it got reused, parts of it were beyond redemption, and they sit on the hard drive where they belong. And then I've got a pile of darlings I've cut from manuscripts with the promise that one day this will be useful to you. And most of the time it's not, but I feel so much better. It's not gone. It still exists. I didn't waste my time. And I did. Okay. Writing those darlings enables you to finish the overall narrative. And however it gets there, if you get there, that's victory, right?
Yeah, true.